The Civil War is a pivotal part of history because it affects everything about this country where we traveled other places. And when we talk about conflict, one thing about this war, we call it the Civil War. It has other names depending upon where you live and where you grew up. But it was a very difficult time. And it affected more than just the people on the battlefield. And when we talk about cross connections, I want to talk about some basic things to connect to your individuals. And then I want you to think about everything else that connects to those records that leads you to more about their story, whether it was on the battlefield or whether it was on the home front, or how it affected their kids, how it affected everybody for the next generations, and still affects us today. Okay? So I want us to look at that. So we'll start with some really basic stuff for you to look at and think about. But I want you to think about a strategy. If you're going to do the military information, I want you to think about the aspect of starting with the basic information and then follow the strategy of assembling, for example, the compiled military service cards called CMSRs that were put together in the 1890s. Okay? And you can create a timeline. And everything we're going to do in regard to this will include doing a timeline. Everything you need to think about should be put in the concept of today, tomorrow, next week, in the same way of somebody's life. And then we'll go through the process of locating perhaps battle maps, if we're talking about the military conflicts, and put the unit that the individual was involved with in the proper location. And then research and study the conflicts. And of course, you can do this in one day. No, you cannot, but anyway. And then we're going to follow up on things like the hospitals, if they were injured, or follow up on camps and other locations that are mentioned in those compiled military service records, if those cards exist. And for many of our ancestors, they do exist, but for many others, they don't exist. So we'll talk about doing supplemental things. But one of the most important things is to consider other members of a unit, because it's maybe your ancestor's cards are missing, but perhaps his brother was in the same unit or was in an adjacent unit, and you can follow his cards or other folks in the community of putting them all together. Okay, with that strategy, let's get down to records and probably things that you're used to looking at. The most recent census is the 1940 census that's available to us today. And I want to show you that right on the 1940 census, there is the possibility of finding soldiers. And anybody that lived to 1940 who identified themselves as a Civil War soldier has one characteristic. They must have been a character, because every one of them had such interesting stories that anybody who lived and was identified as a soldier in 1940 on the census, I guarantee you there could be a whole movie about them. I didn't say it would all be true, but there's a whole story. Pleasant Crump was one of the last surviving Confederate soldiers, not here in Tennessee, but in Alabama, but he fought here. And so in the 1940 census, he is there, but the only indication of military data in 1940 is what's called the supplemental questions, and that would be 3 or 4 people at the very bottom of the page. So if your ancestor was chosen for the supplemental data, that's all that's there in the 1940 schedule. However, you should not ignore the fact that if you know they're there and find the information, begin to look at information from whether it's an obituary or a discussion or an interview, and begin to find other things. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot today, is what are the other sources that are going to tell me lots more about the information. The 1930 census included information as well. They asked the soldier if they were in the Civil War, and over in column 31 and 30, they would have said yes, and then what war it was in. This is one of my ancestors, and so David Evans, who's the grandfather of the household in question, was in the Civil War, and so he indicated such on that line over here. So if you follow that on your census all the way over here, it would say yes and Civil War. If you didn't know that otherwise for anybody you're looking at, now the question only applied to Union soldiers. So you'd say, However, you know, we don't follow instructions very well. And often they will indicate they're a soldier, even if they said, were you a Union soldier in the war? Yeah, I was in the Civil War. And often it will indicate. So don't ignore and say, well, I won't find any of mine because they were in the Confederate. So we look either way. And I will tell you, on that day, when I was 7, when I came in and we were looking for a soldier that I anticipated being Confederate, I had a lot of trouble finding him. And there was a good reason. And so I learned at a very early age to remember what you've been told, sometimes ignore it, and then look at what the records say and where they lead you. And you're going to find out that with some help from here, it led me in a very different direction, okay? Let's go back, 1910. So in 1920, there was not a question. In 1910 census, the same question existed if you were in one of these 4 units: the Union Army, the Union Navy, Confederate Army, or Confederate Navy. And I've clipped these schedules for us to move fast, but there's Pleasant Crump, and his entry is blank. Even though he was a Confederate soldier, he did not indicate that on the 30 census. David Evans did indicate, and it has a UA kind of scribbled into there, but that's a UA, Union Army. Okay? Well, let's forgive him. That's in Kentucky, so the enumerator was in Kentucky. So that's the way we write in Kentucky. I'm sorry. My parents were from Kentucky. But as we move back in time, always think about the timeline. Let's go back to 1890. You're probably aware that most of the U.S. Census was burned in the 20th century. But there's a portion of the 1890 special schedule that covers part of Kentucky through Wyoming and the District of Columbia that is extant. And that's available on Ancestry, so you can use it here on the library, in the library computers downstairs. It was a special census enumerating Union veterans and widows. It's a great schedule. Let me show you the example and where to find it. If you go to any of the Ancestry.com, whether you're at home or here, go to this U.S. Census page. And if you scroll down, it says 1890 Veteran Schedules. Now, some of these actually you can find when you're searching for the person, but not all of them. So that's why you double check. So if you think you have somebody, and Tennessee schedule is there. So if they're Tennessee soldiers, then you can check for the various county. Then once we go there, here's the Davidson County Special Schedule. For example, it's a full form, and I've just blown up the lower section so you can see the names. And notice that some of them are crossed through. They're lined through. So they were not Union veterans. Remember what I said about following instructions? Okay? And so you say, well, wait, mine was a Confederate veteran. Why would he be in the Union veteran schedule? Because the enumerator just enumerated veterans. So even though they're lined through, it's readable. It gives you their units, the dates of enlistment, and dates of discharge. So it's a great record. And if we don't know anything else, it gives us the unit to track back on their particular service and area. So you'll notice that some of these see crossed out. And notice the Census Bureau wrote CONF in Washington. So they looked them up by the units, and Stuart's Cavalry even, okay? So cross through, but this would be a Union here, and then the crossed out. So again, even though it's called the Schedule of Union Veterans and Widows, it includes Confederates, okay? So it's a source that I use regularly, okay? So think about that. We're building that information. And the whole strategy is just to continue to do. The compiled military service records were compiled between 1886 and 1912. And the purpose of that, the War Department, now called the Defense Department, the purpose was to build that schedule because ultimately there were people in that time period in 86 that were becoming infirmed. And there was more demand for pensions or infirmities or even death benefits. And so they had to often prove, how do we prove these people were in the conflict? And so part of that was building these cards from the original loose muster records. And that was the purpose of the cards. And so they're great that we have them. Many of them all have been microfilmed. Many have been digitized and are available at Fold 3, but for all of Tennessee's units, they're all available here, downstairs in the microfilm area, or they're also available on the Fold 3 collection on the computers. We also as we move back in time, we're going to look, there's two sets of cards that are available. One is called the Organizational Index, and this is by name. This is Moses Smith. So the difference is when you see this card, that should tell you one thing. We're going to talk about pensions. There are multiple types of pensions, but there were two armies, correct? There was a Union Army, and there was a Confederate Army. And so usually, if you see this card, this person was in the Union Army. That would have been a federal pension from the federal government. Those original records are housed at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And so they are easily available on both Ancestry.com and Footnote. These cards are available. You'll notice that this one, who's actually one of my relatives, was in the 2nd Kentucky Military Mounted Infantry, 52nd, and that there was no application by him, and that is not invalid, that is invalid. So if the soldier was unable to work, they could apply as an invalid for the first pension. He didn't. His widow did not apply, but a minor child applied in 1883. So I can actually learn a lot from just the cards, studying them. And this is the application. So it did show that the minor child, who was actually my great-grandmother, applied for a pension, but she did not receive it. So if she did, there would be a number right here showing her certificate number. So actually finding the card tells us what else is out there, okay? Just so I'll show you, because it's a little harder on Fold 3, you want to then can go look at the service records to follow up on if you find the pension card. The pension application itself is not currently. Parts of them are available digitized online, and that's a project that's ongoing. They started it, I'd like to say they started it when I was 7. That's not quite true. But they're still not finished, and they will be available. But you can order them, and in fact now, if you go up to Washington, D.C., I would always advise you to go visit our National Archives there. You can go in as a citizen and request your copy. They'll pull the file for you, and then you sit down, and you can digitize your ancestor's copy right there. And then by doing that, it comes up on the National Archives website, so all your other relatives can access the digital copy. Now, if you'd already done on mine, I could access those. But otherwise, you can actually order it. But if you have a chance to go up there, then you can actually review it as well. I can actually then look for Moses Smith in his compiled military service cards as Kentucky in the 52nd Mounted Infantry. And then I would go through all of those. Now, that's not quite as complete as a pension application, but this is contemporary with the time period that he served in that unit. And so you'll notice there's what we call a cover envelope. This is actually an envelope, and all these cards fit within that. And so what they did is as they compiled the various cards from various muster rolls and pieces of information, then they put them in the envelope and added to it as they found additional information, okay? So what's good at that is that when you go find these, put them in order, because they're your copies. It's like your book. You can write pencil notes in your copy of the book, right? We don't do that at the library. And we put them in order, and we can actually determine where they were when they mustered in, where they were when they did any count to the people, where they were in regard to payment, if they were injured, if they were POW. Mostly, those cards should be included within that packet. Okay? And then once we find that, remember the strategy, we'll look at those on each date, and then we can actually go research those battles if they were, those hospitals, prisoner of war camps, etc. One thing I left in here, in his case, Union veterans in particular, all those headstones that still are provided, and in fact, even for Confederate soldiers today, but at a certain point in time, you could get soldiers for veterans, still can, Those cards for those are available on, in this particular case, are on Ancestry. And you can actually review the cards. And so I typed in Moses Smith, and this is his card right here. He's a corporal in the 52nd Mounted Infantry. He's buried at Polkville. I know where that is. You don't, but I know where that is. And that's where my family lived. And his stone was provided by a contractor here. And this is the date of his death. So again, if we're researching a soldier and don't know a lot about them, every little piece of information to find out where they're buried, where's the cemetery stone, is a good help. And often if there's a cemetery stone, we can follow up with that, even on like Find a Grave or Billion Graves. Maybe somebody's photographed it if we've not been there, and we'll learn more about the location, okay? So when you look at every record, consider what else is there to find. How can I connect this with other things? Because if he died then, and he has a family, if he has a farm, I can use traditional estate and settlement records. I can go find his will if he left one. Being my family, no, they would not have left the will. Okay, but still, estate records are maybe more complete often because everybody has to be proven. So again, every piece of information that we build, consider what else connects to it. That's what the cross connection is all about. I do want to tell you, though, that there's two different set of indexes. One, the set that's on footnote, those cards of pension indexes, is a different index than the one that's on Ancestry. Okay? Well, I thought there'd be a copy of it, but it wasn't. And the one on Fold 3 often has the date of death. And the one on Ancestry often doesn't have the date of death. So always look for both of them. They're called organizational indexes and pension indexes, but they're all called Union Veterans pension cards. Now, the hardest work in your handout is compiling all of the Confederate pension information for all the states, because Confederate pensions are not federal pensions. They were granted by the state, not the state where the soldier served, the state where the soldier lived. Okay? And that's why you've got all the other southern states, because we know Tennesseans don't always stay here. Maybe they come back, but they go away. And so in your handout, just like here, I've given you a schedule on when they started the various pensions by state and the type of pensions that were granted. For example, Alabama started a disability pension in '67, right after the war. So a soldier who was disabled could apply for a pension in Alabama. Notice though, scroll down to Kentucky. They didn't start disability pensions till 1912, okay? Now let's just think about it for just a second. If you're living in Tennessee, we start ours in 1891, but Alabama starts them in '67. If you live in the southern half, if you live in Giles County, you might seriously think about moving to Alabama for a while because you're eligible for a state pension if you live in Alabama. And this happens a lot. And I think we don't realize the possibility. And the pension amounts varied by the state legislatures and the years. So there's a lot of movement over time because the pension is better in this state, or I can get this one and that. There were bonus. Sometimes they would pay a bonus in a year. And that's the year people would hear and they would all move to Arkansas just for a while, okay? So this will be, notice that Virginia, they did all of them the same year, 1888. Not as much variance, and the district. So this will help you. Notice that Missouri, for example, never offered a pension to widows or minor children. So again, think about this. If your family moved and moved again and you're looking for a reason, it's not a lot of money, but it may be enough to affect some judgment movement, okay? I'll give you some examples. It's amazing to me when I find those, how much somebody will do for $8 a month. or $12 a month. I mean, so we're not talking massive amounts of money, but it's money. And if you're disabled, for example, and your family may well be willing to help you move. Okay? It's often the case. Family will often help you move. I'll say that again. You have the links in your handout for almost all of these that are available online. And so if you have something that says FS : and then there's a link for Tennessee. For example, in Tennessee, our index to those are available right here on the website of the Tennessee State Library and Archives, and you have that link. Then right below it, the copies of the applications for widows or soldiers is on Family Search. And there's a number. So if we go find the number on the index, then we go to Family Search and they're arranged by the number. But the applications are right there and you can download them from home and print them. Okay? And the same thing is true for all the other states. I have found all those are, let's just say they were all current May 1st. So they could all be wrong today, but they were current earlier this week. I've maintained this and kept it up to date. And so often, I'll show you some examples. Basic information: what is your name? How old are you? What county did you reside? How long did you live there? Have you applied for a pension before? Were you rejected? What is your occupation? How long did you serve? What unit, etc. All that, just basic information. Whoops. Do you own any property? Do you have assets? Because you're not indigent if you have assets, right? You understand what I'm saying? You got to be, there's a difference between disabled and indigent. Indigent saying that you're too poor, we've got to help you out. Are you unable to earn support? Have you transferred any property? Even though it doesn't say it now, today it would say, have you transferred any property to convey assets out of your name so that we don't show assets for you? We know what they're doing, and that's just the simple question they ask. Did you desert the Confederacy? Right? All right. Those should have been notarized with witnesses who knew them, submitting information as well. Affidavits of their doctor, of the county judge, and other commissioners who knew them. And so these applications are worthy of lots of information because you tend to find out who their neighbors are. If you find a commissioner who doesn't know them, but they live in their district, they're going to be very succinct in their recommendation of that individual. Like they might say, he's been living here for a while, I hear this, or I've been told this. And you want to track that information, because who knows more about your family than the neighbors of your family? And if you're trying to find the answers, when I grew up, the lady who lived next door to me, if I needed to know about any of you that lived around the corner, I didn't have to go ask you. I just asked her about you. And she was wealth of great information, much that my parents told me I was not supposed to know. Okay? You know, there are always people like that who will tell. And those are often the witnesses. Now, I will mention here, Tennessee, for example, is one of the great pension bureaus that there are a full set of records for the pension committee as well. So if they went to investigate someone, those are in manuscript collection here. You can actually, if there's some notes in the Tennessee application and you want to follow up to see if they were investigated, then you can actually go back to those investigation records and find out. And a lot of states had pension bureaus where if there was an issue, then they would investigate them. I wasn't going to tell you a lot of stories, but I got to tell you one about the Dotson family, and I pray that you're not related to them because you'll be mad at me. Mr. Dotson served in the Union Army. And his wife knew because he was married before the war. They lived in Claiborne County, okay, over in East Tennessee. And at some point in time, they had about 5 kids. And Mr. Dotson applied actually for a union pension and was granted a union pension. His wife was upset because the checks came to him. She felt like she needed that money more than he did. But she didn't know who the checks came from. And she said, tell me where that pension bureau is. And he said, well, it's a Confederate pension bureau. They're in Nashville. And so she wrote to the pension bureau here in Nashville saying that she needed to be included for B.W. Dotson's pension that he had been granted. Now, he had not been granted, you got my point? He was not granted a Confederate pension. And so in the process of investigation, they thought maybe she should have applied for it. So they said, we don't have that. Are you applying as a widow? And she wrote back basically saying, not yet. Not yet, not yet. She ended up learning that he had applied in D.C. or in Washington, and she wrote to them, and they investigate. And it's a kind of a sad story because it took about 10 years. And the Pension Bureau from D.C. came and investigated. They talked to all the kids. It's great information to me. They all testify. And in the end, they lose their lease. He loses the lease of the farm. He didn't lose the lease. He just wanted to move away from this woman, I think, and he wouldn't divorce her. And he said, we lost our lease. And the literal story is there. The Pension Bureau sees it. So all this is recorded. And as they walk out, he said, honey bunch. And that's written in the report. Honey bunch, we don't own this house anymore. Well, this is the house I've raised all my children in. I'm not leaving. And he says, well, it's been nice being married to you. Goodbye. And he leaves. The children all leave, the wagons. They move to a new house. And, of course, she gets evicted. She doesn't move. She gets evicted and goes to live with the children. And all of the children, all 5 of them, wrote letters to both the General Assembly of Tennessee, to everybody would listen, and to the Pension Bureau in D.C. Please give this woman some money so she has a place to stay. She is killing us. And of course, he died eventually, and she got a percentage because they weren't divorced, and she got a small pension. And then she wrote she lived with all of her 5 children. And of course, they can never say, they didn't say what they said under oath in all those depositions. And when she died, they said something about, the daughter said, how did it say it? Although our mother had a kind and sweet heart, we bore the surface of her indignity, is what they said. So, okay, if you're related and want those records, they're available. So, again, that was Dodson, D-O-D-S-O-N. And somebody's going to watch that's related to this at some point. So, Honey Bunch. Honey Bunch. Often pensions, though, if they were interrupted, both Union and Confederate pensions could be reinstated. So often you will find they're stopped for some reason. If it is a Confederate pension, the reason it's most often stopped is because they moved to another state. You couldn't draw a Tennessee pension and live in Arkansas. You would have to reapply for the Arkansas pension. So again, they could be reinstated. So again, just because you see one fade away, consider the possibility that it's reinstated. Now, if you want to do a little bit more, and I'm going to do this fairly quickly, because you have all the links. This is an index project that we did for soldiers about 25 years ago called the Civil War Soldiers and Sailors System. And so you can actually look up through the National Park Service, and that is in your handout, an NPS, and you can actually type whether they're a soldier or sailor. You can type Union or Confederate. You can search for all people of the same name. And then once you find the unit, then you also can show all the soldiers within that unit. And I would suggest you download that and look at all those names. Determine if it's brothers, cousins, family, because it's really important that you look at a whole group in regard to that. And once you find them, then you go look again for the compiled military service cards, just like we have done earlier. Okay, so there's just lots of places to occupy finding pieces of information. I do want to remind you of one group that are called Galvanized Yankees. And the Galvanized Yankees were Confederate prisoners of war, POWs, who gained their release from prison by enlisting in the Union Army. Okay? And those are found in the 1st through the 6th Volunteer Infantry Regiments. And if you want the film number, part of them are online, but it's M1017 is the National Archives film number. But they're called Galvanized Yankees. And so you'll find the note in the muster. It will indicate that they were POWs who were released because they would join the Union Army. Okay? So that's interesting because you're going to find service as both a Confederate and in the Union. And so the other track is that's somebody that's a POW. And almost all of the prisoner of war rosters and much of the camp information is available. And more readily available today than ever. In fact, Ancestry worked several years ago on collecting those all together. So there are both lists of the selected records of Union POWs and of Confederate POWs available on Ancestry. And remember, as a Tennessee resident, you have access to all of Tennessee's records on Ancestry. And so when you need some of the federal records, you'll need to come to either the library if you don't have a personal, but you have an account to everything here. You can access everything from the library here. So there's a list of soldiers and sailors who died, for example, at Alton, Illinois. We have a large number of folks from this area who were imprisoned at Alton or at Camp Butler after Fort Donelson. And that information is there. In fact, if they died, it'll tell you where they died or where they were buried at the time. They may have been moved. But again, you're piecing this information together, and all of it points together. We also have the Provost Marshals General. These are Union records identifying people who are eligible in the Confederate states for draft. And so this does not mean, though, this one is available on Ancestry.com as well, and we have the microfilm here. But this is the Civil War draft registrations for the southern states, and it'll indicate by county. So you can actually look at the people, it shows their age. But on this list does not mean they served, okay? It just was a preparation list of available people for the draft. Now, the funny thing about this, many of them might be serving in a Confederate regiment. So they're pulling these from taxable lists of people in the county. And if they charge them to come in to be drafted and they don't show up, then there are the consequences for not appearing if you're drafted. So then we get into a court case, usually in a county level, sometimes referred to the federal. Most all of these were a local level. So again, appearance on the list does not confirm enlistment. Okay, I'm going to throw lots of different directions at you. Now, one of the things that is available, and you typically know this, is that if you had a soldier who died during the war from the Union Army, the Union widows' pensions are one of the first records that were digitized and made available to us. They're available on Fold 3. And these, so if you had a Union soldier who died, his widow was eligible for an immediate pension. And the whole pension application, you don't have to order it, it's right there on Fold 3. Okay? This is Kathryn Krantz. Her husband died at Shiloh. This is for one of the interesting story because even though he died at Shiloh, she was living back in Illinois at the time and ended up moving to the West Coast, the Seattle area, actually Eastern Washington. And I say that because on one of my trips to Seattle, I flew over to Eastern Washington to do a workshop, and the people who were there, the friends of mine, knew that I like cemeteries. It's the nature of doing what we do, right? And took me to the cemetery, and not knowing that I was researching this person, took me to the cemetery to that person's stone. Yeah, okay. The stories are what will get you in the process of these. Now, we're going to go post-war for a second because the records don't stop. No, they keep on going. But we get into what we call the lineage and fraternal. And the lineage would be like us who have done lineage work, tracking our ancestor back. Hey, we're part of one of those active groups. If the organization is still active, they still have many of those records available today. And many of the organizations of the veterans modified into other groups or their records are contained. And I want to talk about those. And a lot of this is in your handout as well. So, organization, if it's still active, State Archives and Library, hey, our state has done a great job of collecting various groups from all over the state that are here. Also, there are some in Memphis or in Chattanooga or in Knoxville of smaller sets. And we may have the microfilm of them here or not. And we'll talk about that. They're often in manuscripts and special collections. And almost every museum, a lot of our county museums have some local stuff. So if you're interested in that, that's another possibility. The State Library and Archives did a questionnaire in the 1920 of Civil War questions. And we questioned those veterans. The original questionnaires are here, but they've been published and they're available. So Tennessee is unique in having that set of records as well. And the index is online, so you can find it if there is one. And then you can access those questionnaires. Basic information about their unit and so forth that would be helpful to you as well. And then if you are a researcher by nature, we all know that we have trunks, boxes, little letter boxes that our family has, and there's a lot of personal stuff in there. Maybe you don't have that, but some cousin has it, maybe. And little pieces of paper tell us lots about the people who owned that earlier. You may have had an ancestor that attended the Confederate Veterans Reunion in Little Rock in 1911. It was a massive event. Having the dates of that, then not only can I look at that, but I can actually go look at the newspaper account of that event. And often it will actually list these soldiers by units who attended a reunion event. And there are lots of photographs. So if you're looking for photographs, that's another collection. The GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, and that would be in a hat for the front of the hat of the time period of Union veterans who served during the Grand Army. And then there are lots of other organizations, and I've included part of those, but if you find something, then you want to investigate what it is, okay? Union Confederate veterans organized in New Orleans, and all the collection of photographs of the current officers, like we do today. Let's take a picture of the current officers. Their planning, their unit information, their minutes are all pretty much extant and available. So if you want to follow somebody in their participation within those, I've given you the one that's at LSU, is the largest collection, but we have a partial collection of Tennessee's United Confederate Veterans here in the manuscript collection here within our library and archives. Even up there, I live in Springfield. Even in my little town, our local museum actually has the book of the minute book of the Boyd Hutchison camp of the Crockett Bivouac of the United Confederate Veterans. So it's actually in a glass case on display, but it's the minute book. So if you're interested, it's been transcribed since, if you want to know who's there. It's not a lot of stories, but it's the minute books of when they met and that sort of thing, and the membership list. And there were always photographs at all of these particular groups that collected, and finding the photographs becomes fairly easy once you begin to look at a location. So there'd be maps of where they had, if they met at a fairgrounds, for example, you'll actually find the map, just like we would today. This is where the bathrooms are. Here's where the water coolers are. Here's where they were going to have this memorial event, so you can follow that. And then you can find the timeline of where they met and often photographs. And they typically hired a professional photographer. They would ask them to come by unit, and they would film often by the same people of the unit come together. They knew each other and often would get their names. And a lot of these actually appeared in the paper with names. So I always look at the newspaper first. But if not, you might be able to find the original photographs. And they are really pretty available. we have access to more newspapers. I have access to people who have scrapbooks, and they're full of them. And so again, when you follow through on that, this is a meeting of not only of the veterans, but the auxiliary in the middle, and they're planning the next reunion again. So again, when you begin to piece this information together, there's a lot of stuff there that's readily available. Now within those, there are applications to join each of those little veterans organization. And I pulled this one up because you probably know him fairly well. This is the UCV application of Samuel Rush Watkins, the writer of Company H. This is here, and this one is here within the collection of the UCV applications. And he applied in Rutherford County. And is this connected to you, Bonnie? We've talked about him before somehow, I think. Okay. Maybe he is and you don't know it. No, I'm kidding. One more about this. This one actually, there's a coverage of some rare film. This is from the Times-Picayune picture of 1903. It was one of the largest reunions in New Orleans. And the line of soldiers, they marched. You see them marching down on St. Charles. It was a 6-mile parade. It took more than 2 hours to pass a given point. And the newspapers have all the parties, meetings, the speeches are printed in the paper. All this is during the week. The next week has the obits of the 21 veterans who died during the reunion. Only 2 died during the parade. That's sad, I'm telling you. It's a possibility. Okay. Great place to find information on Confederates and non-Confederates. This is a great magazine by S.A. Cunningham, published here in Nashville. It's called the Confederate Veteran Magazine, published from 1893 through about 1920. It includes articles about the units, about individuals, and obituaries. So they'll often have a last call. And in your handout, I don't think I have it on here. Yeah, in your handout, you'll find this, and I have given you all of the available under Confederate Veterans magazines. These don't have page numbers, but you'll find it. You'll find a link to the images of this on the Internet Archive, Haughty Trust, and there is an index of names to the first 40 volumes there on Haughty Trust. So you can go look up the names and then go to the volumes. So the volumes are there. So you don't have to go find these. We do have some of the set here, but the first 32 volumes are available online. And it's in your handout. So you can search across the names, by the way. It's amazing information. And when I say it's both Union and Confederate, there were many times that they would ask a Union general or a Union captain to write their perspective of a battle. And so it'll be published as well. But they'll have the last roll. The last roll is typically an obituary. And somebody would write an obituary about this person they knew from their unit or an officer, et cetera. So it's really good information. There are some photographs of veterans within that. I found one of this group in Texas that was published in there, and I went to the courthouse down in Texas, and this same picture is on the wall in the courthouse. The one in the courthouse has the names of all the people underneath it. But so you might find a picture and say, hey, where's that picture? And I could track down the picture from the 1901 reunion of the local vets. This is a joint reunion of United Confederate Veterans and the GAR Grand Army. This is in Springfield, Tennessee. And you'll notice there's U.S. colored troops, so both sides, some in uniforms of type, others not. So there are lots of other pictures. So again, this gets it very local. So again, there was a local chapter of the UCV. There was a local chapter of the GAR. They had a joint reunion, and they all got together. Okay? So there were many of those. With that, you get lots of the local folks. And then again, look in your trunk. Look at the notes. There are personal items that might provide a direct connection to any of these organizations. And often we might not recognize what they are in particular. The tag in particular, somebody brought, let me copy this, it was from Pennsylvania. And he was at a reunion, and it was at one of the Gettysburg reunions. And they put it in their pocket or attached it. So if they passed out or died, there was a notification of the next of kin. See, we carry all our information. People didn't always carry all that. So the reunion groups made these, and that he survived obviously because he brought it home. But that was that. In case of sickness or accident, please notify. Okay, so I think it's an interesting concept. And then of course, Society of the Army of the Republic here out of Nashville was led by Gates Thurston, who was one of the first presidents of the Tennessee Historical Society Union, who met his, as he said, his Confederate wife here, and they married, and they have a great history here of record in regard to that. And he was the first, in fact, he was the first president. He signed this one. So you might find Society of the Army of the Republic. You might find a certificate for the Grand Army. And so within those, you can learn within those applications and notes, again, the military conflicts they participated in, more importantly, the individuals who participated with them. Because often the long-term history of who we know is more important to find out more about us than the person we knew one time, but that we kept in contact with. You know, I'm getting ready to have a class reunion. And it's long enough that I know them all because I knew them once, right? I knew them, it's high school reunion. I knew them then. Some of them, I will gather, I may not have seen them in that time period at all. And so the whole point is the people that we know throughout our lifetime have more of an influence on a person we might have known one time. They're still important. So again, that's part of what we learn in regard to this. And it talks about localities, officers, and other resources. And they did historic preservation. So particularly in the 1890s, the veterans often got involved in protecting battlefields. And so that's what we call the memorial time period. So we have the 1890s where things were put up. We have the 1910, more political. Things were put up from different people. And again, we learned that from the records of these organizations, okay? Don't forget too, within your county court minutes, almost every county or many counties had home guard units to protect what was going on. And depending upon their point of view, northern Middle Tennessee was occupied from 1862 to the end of the war. And so if their perception was protecting it from the Union Army, we had home guard who were watching out for what the Unionists did. And then we had the Union soldiers watching to see what the Confederates did in regard. So they were here and the whole aspect of the time period in regard to that. One of the great projects that this State Archives did for all of us was looking back the Civil War in Tennessee. We don't use the map now. We have the list because we did all of them. This was during the process. And so there's a list within the link that you have in your handout that takes you to this project, and then you choose the county. And then you go look and see what was collected. So these were items that those of us who had things in our home, that we brought, that we shared. And so your point is now you can go access all of them. Now I want to show you a couple of really important examples. This is one of mine. This is J.S. Jones's diary. He was in the 30th Tennessee, and he was captured at Fort Donelson. So he was a POW, and so this is his day book from 1862, okay? And it's actually dated 1862. So he had a new day book for the year, and then he was captured in February, okay? And was taken to Camp Butler. And so I brought this, and then it was, all the pages are copied, so it's available. It is not, the transcriptions aren't there. Those are my notes for you today. You'll have to read his handwriting. But I picked just one page. And so there's all kinds of diaries like that were in this collection. They're already available. They're already digitized. They're on the Tennessee State Library and Archives website. So I'm telling you to go look at them. So in this case, the pickets commenced fighting at Fort Donelson. That was on the 9th. On the 11th, and you can hardly even read, that's the writing from over here on the 14th. The gunboats, made their first appearance at Fort Donelson. The infantry commenced fighting at Fort Donelson. The big fight taking place between the gunboats and the battery at Fort Donelson. I must have, what was May Day? Who knows what it was? And it goes on, and if you go through the rest of this, then they're captured. It talks about the surrender at Fort Donelson, and then the boats that they're transferred, where the Union Army took them up the river, the places they stopped, and then they start on the first one of, this is a great listing of all the people that he knew who died or got sick or what's going on. So that's where you get the diary entry, and sometimes there's personal notes in regard to that. So that's why I indicate diaries are a great way to find out a lot of personal information. That guy ended up coming back, and he was the sheriff of Robertson County, Tennessee after the war. But this is kind of all the kind of things that are there. So some people have medals, and some of you might have participated in this several years ago where they came out to every county. A lot of the staff came, and we archived or they filmed and copied. And so that was the collection of making them available to all of us, but yet the records, those personal items, still may belong to us. Okay, mine's still still there. There were reunion coats, there are photographs, and again, this is all available to you on the Tennessee State Library and Archives website, and you have the link in your handout. Other states have done similar. And so I think you can also, if you have folks who moved and went to other places, consider the same type of record in other states and just follow it through their state library and archives. And almost every county has great records. This is from Hamlin County, and they know who all the people are. And then this is one of Scott Legion's. That one showed up, and I had to find out about that. And that's a group of folks that were mustered in that were together in the Mexican War, and then regathered for the Civil War. So they formed an older group, a newer group, and continued till today as Scott Legion. Okay. Within the notes, the minutes, I just wanted to pull up a thing. Here's the names included: the Cheatham Bivouac, Gale, Dudney, Elliott, McNeely, Jackson, and Porterville revamped an organization known as the Tennessee Confederate Memorial and Historical Association. They plan to care for Confederate graves and bring living veterans into closer fraternal organizations through benevolent programs for ill comrades, indigent widows, and destitute orphans. Okay? So within those minutes, you find out what the groups are working for. We have access here to the Nashville papers from about 1812 through 1932, and actually on up into the modern paper. And those are available to you here through the computers downstairs. And the Nashville papers cover the whole state in regard to events like this. And so if you have a guide, you can search by name within the collection we have. But if you have a bivouac, once you know the name of the unit, you can search across the paper for every time the bivouac did something. We also have actually the boxes of the Tennessee Division of the Bivouac Records, and they're divided out by county. This is part of the collection here. They're on microfilm, so you don't have to wait for manuscripts in particular, even though they're there. And so it's the UCV, and there is a finding aid. This is a copy of the finding aid, so you can actually talk to the staff. But down in the microfilm section, you could actually load the film and look up Clarksville, Montgomery County, the Forbes Bivouac, which would have the membership roster and biographical information on its members. You can do that today. So, right? I want to point out that they have these in every state across the South, and many non-Confederate states had Confederate veterans that had units as well. And almost everywhere I travel, there are local meeting groups, and those records exist often locally, maybe not nationally. And so it's worth looking at home and abroad, as we say. Okay, so they're having a big anniversary. The Daughters, UDC, was founded here, and of course that's a Tennessee Historical Society marker here from Caroline Goodlett and the group starting the chapter here in 1894. So why is the invitation this year?
Number one, and that's it's the Exchange Building now.
The Exchange Building.
It was originally the Baxter Building.
Anyway, the organization changed, but there's a large collection of the records here. at the Tennessee State Library and Archives, and they're celebrating a big anniversary and 125th.
And
Okay.
all of the UDC applications are bound and here at TSLA.
All of the UDC applications are bound and available here at the Tennessee State Library and Archives.
I guess they're on microfilm, but
Maybe on
they're in the
microfilm.
they're in the big book.
Okay, both are here. I want to go back to Confederate Veteran Magazine just for a second to show you the kind of things that are there. So often within that, people would submit an article or submit a news clip, advertisement in essence, looking for some friend. And so there are a lot of those where they're trying to locate somebody who were members of a particular unit. So again, that is searchable through the index that I gave you, and you can look for those and go look at the specific thing, the article. That's what it would look like. And again, they also have those, the last roll, which are the obituaries. The obituaries are there. So I just want you to realize they're there, and they're written by somebody at the time. So it would have been a friend of theirs. And so it's worth finding and locating that information as well. So again, those, hold it because I'm gonna run out of time. And the Confederate Veterans magazines are published in various ways, but they're all online and accessible to you. So the groups, let me quickly go through. This is one of Virginia's ancestors that she told me about when we talked about groups before. There are a lot of local groups of various names, but this is a local group, the Order of the Palefaces, which was a group of veterans. Again, all of these were in the local paper. Names, events. So again, the newspaper becomes a great source. Once we identified the names of the groups, some of the people, then we can search for them throughout in the process, okay? And that would also include all of the SCV groups with all the names of the groups, locations, and people as well. I think it's kind of amazing how much we tend to think we're going to not be able to find that stuff, and you're going to have to find it in a collection. But the newspaper, we have access to the newspaper so readily to us today. And even if I have to come here to use the newspaper collection here, the computers are indexed for the Nashville papers. So I can search for the name of the group and it'll just pull them all up. So it's just a matter of going through and identifying those and clipping them. And Gates Thruston would be glad that we're doing that. Again, he was he was in the JAG unit of the Union Army. So he was an attorney and one of the first presidents of the Tennessee Historical Society. So it's through his original stuff of the collections that were made to the Historical Society that things that we have here and things are at the State Museum that were part of the permanent collections. Even though he was from Ohio, he's one of those Yankees that stayed and loved Nashville and has continued to promote the historical story here from that point. And I'll tell you, there's more and more of the photographs that are being put up on some of our local sites, local history sites, that we're sharing information. This is Decatur County. And then there are certain markers with information. This is the GAR monument that's in Knoxville. And lots of publications in Harper's Weekly, of course, which was a newspaper of the time. Those are also available and easy for us to access and collect. So again, and without going too far, you're aware of the Ryman Auditorium. That gallery was built in 1897 because of what was going on in Nashville, which was the Centennial. So a lot of the things that we have from the Centennial, and they hosted Confederate Day, and that's when they raised the money to build the gallery that's in the Ryman as part of the Centennial activities. And so that you're aware, the Centennial activities all over Nashville, there's a tremendous amount of that collection at the Parthenon in the museum there, and there's some additional stuff here, a lot of photographs here, and a lot of planning. Because remember, it was kind of like a World's Fair. So people from everywhere, and they hosted counties and people. They had Women's Day, they had a GAR Day. So again, every kind of group that was available in the Centennial really opens the possibility of what's there. And don't forget those personal collections, all those items that we find within the information. Okay, now take a deep breath. I'm going to show you another set of records that you maybe have not thought about. And all is there, so you don't have to take notes, but I'm going to show you how to find things that are found within the governor's papers in regard to people writing and asking for help. This would be any kind of claims. Or maybe the husband was in the prison and we're looking for a release because, hey, it was the war, you know. And so again, all that information is there. So we're going to talk about that very quickly. You know, let me just say, we live in a world of great opportunities to look at stuff. Because I can remember when I first started that I had to carry, it was such a, used to I'd have to draw on a chalkboard. And then when we went from that, and I actually had a machine I could bring and lay overheads on. Remember those? And we thought that was so wonderful. It's so easy today. We're spoiled. Okay. There are 4 collections of governor's records here. They're here. And that includes Isham Harris, Andrew Johnson, who was the military governor during the war, William Brownlow, Parson Brownlow, after the war, and then DeWitt Center on through 71, okay? So I'm covering, these are the governor's papers that cover the time period that most of the war activities and post-war activities would have occurred, okay? And governor's papers, 19, 20, 21, and 22. They know where those are. They can point you to them. And within those, there's a card file of subjects and letter writers. So it's kind of an index that's created that you can go through and look at those, okay? So for example, in the finding aid for Johnson as military governor, there's kind of general correspondence, specific index cards, requests for commissions, appointments, okay? Petitions for clemency. So all the things that would happen, the governor's papers in those time periods often tell us lots about the individuals who write letters. Doesn't mean that the governor acted in regard to that. But this is what the cards look like when they were prepared by the staff. So it indicates the letter writer, what the topic is about, and what county where it originated.
If they were released on
It won't be here.
on the approved prison record, would it give any indication that they were released due to?
It depends.
Okay.
Yes and no. Always go here anyway. Always go here anyway.
The story was he was released during this time.
There should be a release. Okay. Always check, even if they say, why not look at the other record? Because this will tell you this is the letter that was written. This is the person making the request to the governor for clemency or whatever. These are not all clemency cases. I just pulled up a set alphabetically. They're alphabetically. Now, Andrew Johnson served 2 roles for us. He served as president and he served as military governor. All right? As he served after President Lincoln passed. The papers of Andrew Johnson were published by the University of Tennessee Press. The hardbound books of these are in the South Reading Room downstairs. And there's a preview of these volumes on Google Books. So if you're a Google Book fan, you can actually go look up, and the preview shows you almost all the pages. However, and that's what it looks like on Google Books. So I can search for a name within Google Books, and it'll identify the page number and volume in the pages downstairs. Okay? But let's go one step further. Library of Congress has these original papers. We have the microfilm copy. They published an index to them, and all of those indexes now have been digitized, and so I can actually look at this index that was published by the Library of Congress. In your handout, don't panic. So within that, I'm looking for a letter from Manissa George to Andrew Johnson. It's in Series 2, 1864, February the 15th. It's 4 pages with cover. So I'm going to look for, and so actually that film is here. I'm going to look for Series 1, and it shows the date range. So I can actually go, I'm going to actually look at the letter downstairs. Okay? So I can pull it up on microfilm. Here are so there's 3 pages of the letter and a cover. That's an envelope. And so that's actually the letter that she wrote. Here it is, it's published in the book in volume 6 downstairs. They lived in the 15th Civil District that was between Springfield and Tyree Springs. And basically the letter is she's telling about her husband, the difficulty of the war, that they can't settle her husband's estate because even though her nephew is the guardian for her sons, and they can't sell the estate because the sheriff said we can't sell estate till we have a clerk or have a court. Well, we don't have a court, so we can't settle it. So she's writing to Governor Johnson, and that's how she addresses him, to give her some help. All her buildings were burned by rebel citizens, so obviously they're Union support. We don't have a sheriff now, so they can't help us. So you can go read the letter if you're interested. I'd be glad to share it. But they're going to leave. They want help. They want to get out of this place. We're going to go to Illinois. Okay? Don't know why. They never went to Illinois. I will tell you that. Her sons were good crafts carpenters, and they built furniture. They went to Knoxville. The sons did. Established a cabinetry company that still is in existence in Knoxville today, and they took care of Mama. Mama didn't get any money, and so Mama lived with the boys, and they sold the farm. But the details of all that are in the governor's papers. So again, just looking for the access of that, notice that she said, your political friend, Vanessa J. George. Her father was a Cumberland Presbyterian minister who was well known, who was involved with the treaties with the Chickasaw. Robert Bell, who was Honorable John Bell, congressman, was involved in that treaty with the Chickasaw Nation. So even looking at that, expanding the information, our history is not standing on one person. Once we start, we just keep moving. We just keep moving. And there's more and more information. This is a picture of her sister. I can't find a picture of her, but her Serena Nimmo. It's not fair. Pictures at the time are not pleasant. We can follow up and do, in regard to the settlement of the estate, I don't expect you to read all that, but know that we could go back using the county court records here at the State Library and Archives. There were 6 heirs, so we can follow up. However, her letter does not appear in the governor's paper collection. It only appears when he's the president collection. So her letter is at the Library of Congress, even though it's microfilm. So my point in saying that is, Andrew Johnson is he's both. So check both his governor papers and his presidential papers. Twice as many chances to find good stuff, right? There's a letter like this is from Phyllis Brown. There are a lot of letters like this in Johnson's papers. She's lost her son. She didn't know where he is. She didn't know if he's needy of clothes of any kind, if he's in Nashville or where is he. And so this is a woman of color, 1864. She's willing to take care of her son. She just didn't know where he is. Lots of those. So again, folks are often writing to say, hey, I've lost track, or I've heard he was injured. Where do I go to help? So if you know of any stories like that, go check both of those sets of papers. Really good. The serial set, this is part of the Governmental Docs program. This serial set is available online at the Library of Congress starting in 1817. Within these documents, they're also included, don't panic. They ran regular reports of people who not only applied for pensions, but who applied for claims. The fence was damaged, my horses were taken during the war. And so in regard to that, you can actually find a report like that in this case. Wesley Gaston, McMinn County, $29.20. So you can read through these. They were published several times in regard to the acts, and that's the claim acts. And those are all listed, like you really know, are all in this handout. Every of the acts of claims are in there by date. So maybe more than you want to know, but I want you to be able to find this stuff. So there's a lot there. Partial list of even additional information of the private claims for all the years through 1909 are available on Google Books. Full books are available in government doc libraries, including here. So you can always ask the staff. They will help you find the information. We're not going to have the claim files. They will be actually in the National Archives. But if you have the claim number and information, you can request the claim file. And if they're published in the Senate documents or House documents through government printing office, then you have actually what they were asking for here. Like this is Willis P. Long's money, and it's actually printed in the colonial, in the congressional report. However, Willis P. Long was not loyal to the U.S. government, which becomes a whole issue. All those claims after the war, federal government are not going to pay if you were not loyal to the U.S. If you were part of the group, you're not going to get paid. And it gets another whole series of claims that you have all the details on. We'll get to that one. But it covers lots of stuff. This is Martha Jewell, 1906. She's trying to get her husband's pension. He was in the U.S. colored troops. But they were people of color. In Tennessee, we did not require couples that were married during slave times to remarry. We declared all their marriages valid and they didn't have to go get a certificate. She has no certificate to show. Now, they did go to the federal agency called the Freedmen's Bureau and register it. If you're not working with that, Freedmen's Bureau in Tennessee lost 98% of their records before 1910, before they ever got into the National Archives. So we have a major loss. There's none of the marriages that were ever, there's 4 in Lebanon. There's four marriages in Lebanon that don't exist. She could not prove it using the federal agency. They couldn't find the marriage. And so she has to get people to testify. And this is one of the ones all in there. All of that is all about Martha Jewell. So if your family ever tried to apply and went to Congress to get it, the records exist. And most of them are published like this and easy to find. Her husband died December 31st, 1901, cause not stated. He was drawing $15 a month. She was granted the pension in the end, and it was $8 a month. A lot of work, but still, it's $8 a month. Again, follow the money in regard to those records. All those claims exist, lots of records. So unless you thought there was just a little bit, my point is to tell you, I'm not even telling you everything. There's lots more there. When we just think about it, what else is there? This is the Southern Claims Commission. These are for claims from the war, from folks across the South in the southern states in particular. They created a special commission. This is a book by Gary Mills where he's published those, and that's available downstairs, but this is also available online. All the links are in your handout, Southern Claims Commission. So here's the names of the people and the county. Ransom Langham, Commission 14128, Office 779, Report 2 was disallowed. So barred, disallowed, or allowed. And generally disallowed, they rejected, it can be reconsidered. Barred, don't ever bring it back again. You reject it and don't bring it back. Barred and disallowed are all on Fold 3. So you can access the actual application downstairs or at home if you have a Fold 3 account, or downstairs on the library's account. So there's Random Langham, there's the file number, and then you can actually go through. I've typed some of them up. This is Chuck Sherrill's favorite one, so I pulled this one up. It's the Robertson County one. This is what you'll find in there. The claimant, this is from Springfield, Robertson County. She filed in 72. It's 46 pages. These are not little. She's claiming $739 for a dwelling house, a smokehouse, port, rails, wood, and tobacco. And then here's all the information. She had one son in the rebel army who died in service, but the rest were all Union. She swears her loyal sympathies and her witnesses confirm her loyalty. It's going to be a part of every one of these applications, confirming their loyalty to the Union. So again, if you're looking for the information, there's a lot there, and it's worth your time and effort. They allow part of it, but they reject the tobacco because we don't know, we don't know how that tobacco was used, etc. And then I looked back. Chuck wanted to know the results of this, And I was able to find the farm. It's about a mile and a quarter out of Springfield. She also had a house in town. Her house and smokehouse were used by Lieutenant Wheeler. So Springfield was kind of a fort at that point in time. I live right in the middle of where that fort is today. The 8th Wisconsin Artillery, and it was a smallpox hospital from February to May of '65. And there's a burial site where patients were buried in the yard just a few steps from the house. It was left infected from her point of view, and that was one of the claims that she made, is that they left that hospital infected. It's useless to me. It's a smallpox place, and she paid $3 a month rent for the house by them while it was used for a hospital. All that's found in those 47 pages. And now when I walk outside and dig in my dirt, I wonder if it's smallpox. So, and then there's more about her husband was a Presbyterian minister, and all this is in there. So again, take some time, mull and ponder, think about what's out there, what can I learn, what's not there. All these witnesses, there are witnesses' reports as well. So that's why you think about 46 pages, there's lots of different people talking. So your ancestor might not be the person who filed the claim. If they were a neighbor, they may be one of the people who testified or exhibited a deposition. So it's worth looking. If they're in the area, just double check all that information. Okay, the Polk family. I got to do Montgomery County real quick. Henry Polk, born 1839, 1900. He has a farm. Here's the 1880 ag schedule. Let's go quickly. I talked about the 1890 Veteran Census again. There's Henry Polk. He's a private in 16th Tennessee. There's the time he served for 3 years. Okay? And in this particular case, I can go to that veteran schedule. I'm reminding you again. It's on Ancestry under 1890 Veteran Schedule. He's a private Company A, 16th Tennessee, U.S. Colored Troops. There's the dates. The pension application, he's a Union soldier, available at the National Archives. In particular, to people of color, those are essential for us often. And let me just show you why in regard to U.S. Colored Troops. So it asks that basic information we're looking for, but it also goes on, there's the pension, and I showed you the dates. He applied, there's his application, he received the pension. There's his widow, she received the pension. So again, the card tells us what I should be looking for. There's the other card. This is the one on fold 3. See, they're very similar. Have a little more information, but look at the bottom. He died the 23rd of October, 1917 in Clarksville. So the one on fold 3 often has the date of death of the pensioner. His application asks, where was he born? Were you a slave? Who were your owners? What was your rank? Your height, descriptive information. And all that's there, and including not only the owner at the time, multiple applications. It talks about the owner at the time of the war and the father of that owner who was the owner when he was a younger man. Lots of detail that helps us with that family information. He was owned just before enlistment by Tom Polk, and before that by Mr. Irving Polk. Okay, Polk names should stand out because Irving Polk is the first cousin of President Polk. That's still buried over there, okay? And so again, the family, the information that we get in regard to that information. Okay, when I was 7, I came to look up a story. I wanted to find my Confederate ancestor. Hey, I was born here. I thought that was what I was supposed to find. And when I came in and I asked the staff, and I could not find him serving as a Confederate soldier later. I found one record and then I missed it. And she said, well, let's look. You know, it was not uncommon that folks served in both armies. Well, number one, I was 7. I did not know that. I was somewhat surprised. The staff steered me, and they steered me into a set of collection. And ultimately, we went into the newspapers. And I won't show you the whole newspaper, but in the newspaper, as I sat there that day, I read, a court-martial will be held 4:00 p.m. this day to try Elvis B. Parker, a charge of desertion from the Confederate service and having been found in the arms in the service of the federal states. President Major Washmorgan, Major Gano, Lieutenant White, Judge Advocate Roberts, by the order of John Hunt Morgan, Brigadier General. So I'm like, really? And you have to do a little study. You have to stop and say, maybe the stories I've been told are only half true. I haven't heard the whole story. He was 21 years old at the time. He did serve in 7th Tennessee Battalion. He served his time period. He got out. He went and joined the 5th Kentucky U.S. He came back and fought. He was from Hartsville in Trousdale County today. Wasn't Trousdale County then, but he came back. He was captured in Gallatin in the battle by his old unit. And every one of these people wrote books. Washington Morgan, Major Gano, Judge Advocate Roberts, and John Hunt Morgan. And they wrote in their notes about him because he was such a young man. They all knew him. They respected him. He served well. And they believed that he was going to die with honor, which is not a 21st century concept in the idea. There was another guy that deserted, and he was whipped. My 21-year-old ancestor is going to be shot. Not anywhere in the world, on the courthouse in Hartsville, his hometown. There's the regimental order the very next day. They'll appear on dress parade. Found in the 5th Kentucky Regiment, deserter from Captain Bennett's company. Having been tried by court-martial and found guilty, sentenced to be executed at 4 o'clock this day within our camp. His wife was able to see him. General Morgan offered to let her stay for the execution. She chose not to, but they had a little baby. And the only time he saw the baby was that day that he died. So he got to hold the baby, and then her dad had brought her, and they rode away. And I have that story because I know this existed, and then I began to find it. So that my great-grandfather rode away, and they heard the shot as his father was executed on the courthouse in Hartsville. Now, if you don't look, and if you don't ask the questions, you do not find. So my challenge to you is take the basis of where we start and then say, how does that connect to that? How does that connect to that person or that record? You've got more than we talked about. Take some time to play. Go look at some of these sites. Try out some names. If you have questions, you've got my email. You can pop me a question. I'll try to answer it sometime in the next 5 years. And don't forget the asset that you have right below our feet. The staff here care about your family, and they will help you. Just be patient with them because they've not touched every record. And there's nobody here as old as me, so they haven't had a chance to touch everything that we've touched. And so again, the more we touch, the more we know. And I appreciate you guys being with us. Thank you guys for being here.